This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is up on Center Stage, the show about the arts and the artists behind their work. If I say North American Indigenous Songbook, are any of my listeners familiar with its existence or the music of Native Americans? If I ask how many of you know the names of prominent Native American and First Nation composers, what will you say? In the world of Native Americans, or as I will refer to, the First People, there are a great many undiscovered giants in the classical and popular music world. Composer Raven Chacon is a Diné artist who became the first Native American to win a Pulitzer Prize in music. Joy Harjo is a Muscogee Creek poet and composer. As a multidisciplinary artist, she is the first Native American to become the 23rd Poet Laureate of the United States. Yvonne Russo is a powerful voice in the storytelling world as an award-winning film director, producer, and writer in television and film. She is a proud member of the Sikangu Lakota Tribal Nation and director of the film Viva Verdi, amongst many others. Today, I have with me another tribal member, Timothy Long. Maestro Long has lived the life force of music from his early childhood. He is now artistic and music director of opera at the Eastman School of Music. He has worked on the conducting staff at the Metropolitan Opera, Wolf Trap, Opera Theater of St. Louis, and New York City Opera, just to name a few. In 2017, he conducted the world premiere of Missing, the groundbreaking work by Marie Clements and Brian Current about the 5,000-plus missing Indigenous women in Canada. He is passionate about his work with the Plimpton Foundation, which promotes the work of Native, Indigenous, and underrepresented Americans through scholarships and commissions. As you are about to learn, Timothy Long is a very special and compelling artist. Timothy Long, welcome to Center Stage. You are the first Native American guest that I have had on my show. It is a thrill.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me, Pamela.
Of course, what an honor. You know, an obvious question it is to me right now. Now, a guy like you at the Eastman School, wow. It feels to me like it may have been a long road for you, but how did you come to music?
Well, as you know, every road in classical music is long. It takes many years of training and understanding, and I think it's the payoff is incredible if you sustain a life of music. I began, well, of course, I grew up in southeastern Oklahoma at the bottom part of the Creek Nation. And by the way, it's same tribe as Joy Harjo. I've worked with Joy, and I've worked with Raven Chacon before as well. And I am the first generation in my family to have English as a first language. So my father was full-blood Muscogee Creek. My mom is full-blood Choctaw. And we grew up in a very mixed area between whites and mainly Muscogee Creeks in that area. And it is very unusual, the path that I took, but it originated in my mom's story. My mother grew up in far eastern Oklahoma, in poverty, really rural area. Then she ended up being sent to a boarding school, an Indian boarding school, which are like the Canadian residential schools. You may have heard of those. So she was there for a number of years until she was in high school and she caught tuberculosis before there was treatment. She was then sent to an Indian tuberculosis sanatorium for a total of 5 years, where she was in quarantine for most of the time.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it was a really tragic upbringing that she had. But there were things that were created in her life that affected me greatly. The first one was that in this Telehina, Oklahoma sanatorium, Oklahoma, she said everybody was listening to country and Western music, and she
Mhm.
got sick of the twang. So she came across a classical station and she began listening to classical music. So she was told to never have children because she had a lung removed and they felt she was too weak, but she did. And when she and my father had me, they were only listening to Beethoven. So I know it's a really, really unusual. You would think for anybody in my small town to be listening to Beethoven when they're a toddler, but especially for a Native American kid to be listening to Beethoven. So I had that combined with going to a Muscogee Creek church called Salt Creek Indian Church. And at that church, my grandfather was the minister. It was filled with my relatives. Everything was done in the Muscogee Creek language. But I saw my first piano there. My distant aunt, Hetty Long, was the church pianist. And I used to sit and watch her fingers go into the keyboard. While at home, I was obsessively listening to music. And then Hetty became my babysitter. And then I got a toy piano at 3, and I was obsessively playing it. And finally, my mother, who worked at the local high school, met a 15-year-old girl. And she was from a very poor family, but she played the piano really well and she sang really well and she wanted to start teaching. So I became her very first student. She was 15 and I was 5. And I am so lucky to have had her because she instilled in me a love for music, and it was like playtime all the time. I never felt like I had to practice or that things had to be. I played movie music, I played pop music, I played classical music.
Mhm.
The most pivotal thing was that she started me on theory before I could read words. So, and I still have this. I had a theory coloring book, if you can imagine that. And I remember my mother, who didn't know anything about music, would read the question to me, and there was a blank keyboard, and I would color in the answer with crayons. Isn't that brilliant?
This is amazing.
I
At
love
such
it.
a young age, a theory coloring book. I
Yes,
love that. If
I do
only we
too.
could have all been so lucky.
Yes, exactly. Because, so many people learn theory later, in
Yeah.
their teenage years or in college. But when you start at that age, um, you slowly, slowly, slowly build a deep understanding of what it really means.
How
Not just
music
the
works.
surface, but the
Yeah.
guts of music.
Yeah. Yeah. The form, the structure, for such a young mind, that's so important at that point. My
I
gosh.
agree. And in addition to that, I am convinced that listening to a composer like Beethoven, who was a great musical philosopher,
Right.
teaches your brain how to hear patterns, how to recognize patterns, how to
Yep.
hear structure. So you are absorbing the knowledge of these centuries when you listen to music like that as a young age. And it affected me deeply.
How does that stay with you now when you hear Beethoven?
Well, I revere Beethoven. I revere so many of the German composers so much that
Hmm.
I almost I almost don't want to perform them because I started music because it was such a personal thing.
Hmm.
I was enraptured by it, and it started as something that was really, really private to me. And I still have that desire to keep certain things very private. Like Bach, I love Bach. I don't want to perform Bach. I want to keep Bach for me.
For
And a lot
yourself.
of
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of them are still that same way. But in addition to that, and I didn't really know the word for this until I got older, but I had very strong synesthesia as a child, and that was a big key to my connection with music, and it's still with me. I had very strong perfect pitch as a child.
Hmm.
I had a little bit of photographic memory, so I had a lot of neurodivergence going on with my relationship with music, and that combination is really the key to what has happened in my life.
So, besides that coloring book, you had all the colors of the rainbow going on in your world, that private world of yours, which must have been so precious to you. Did
It's
you did you see the musical notes in colors with your synesthesia?
No, there are many different forms of synesthesia.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who don't know, it's basically when you experience one sense through another. And for me, it is visual to sound. So I have it with the spellings of names, even to this
Mm-hmm.
day.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a child, the way it exhibited itself was through my Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars. My parents, said I would sit in my bedroom for hours in silence, and they just thought I was a really good kid. So I'm glad I had that perception. But you know what I was doing? I was sitting there with my cars, and I still have them, and I can still hear them. Based on their color, their shape, and their mat, they denoted timbre. And my sister played the flute, so they played the flute, and it affected their vibrato speed, the clarity of their sound, their inherent technical successes and deficiencies. It told me everything. And I would be sitting there with my cars in a row in front of me, going one by one, hearing them play in an audition in my head. And
Wow.
that was the greatest, greatest thing. I loved it. And then when I got to, I don't know, I think I try to say a younger age because when I was doing this, I knew it was unusual and I didn't tell
Mm-hmm.
anybody that I would do it. But I was probably around 14, 15
Mm-hmm.
when I I would here's another bit of neurodivergence. I can memorize lists of names, long lists of names through synesthesia. So the names denote quality, and I memorize the
Mm-hmm.
quality. So I used to memorize lists of programs when I was younger. Today, I memorize every person's name in the orchestra that I conduct, so I know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, it happened that I would save names that I found interesting, and I would look at programs and find names that just spoke to me. And then I started creating names. So I had a list of around 200 names that represented people throughout the world. And I would let these names, this sounds crazy. I know it sounds crazy. Remember, it's synesthesia. And this was all in my head. I would choose maybe 100 names at a time. And by this point, they were violinists. And I thought, well, this is not fair that they have to play the same piece. So I would let them choose their own piece based on their name, which denoted many qualities. Again, vibrato. It told me how they held their violin because people hold them differently. It told me about how their bow speed was on the violin. So I would then, um, and this took hours. I would divide myself up into five different judges with different perspectives. I would listen to each name play an audition in my head. And as five different judges, I would give them number scores. I would go through a list of about 100. At the end of the day, I would take my calculator and tally up the scores, and it was like the greatest Christmas that you've ever had. So I was never bored by myself,
No.
and I still am not because I still have a lot of things going through my mind.
Were you able to impart all of this visualization to your parents?
Only when I was an adult.
Yeah.
Because again, as a child, I think we all have a desire to fit in.
Yeah.
And all of these things that are so close to me felt bizarrely different. So I didn't want anybody to know. But yeah, when I got older, I told them. I tell the story all the time now because I think it is a real key to how I look at music and
Hmm.
how important it is to me.
And you've just spoken about something very important with synesthetes, that there is a personality, there is a texture, there is a warmth, there is that feeling that we embody ourselves with. I am very much a synesthete. And I used to think, Tim, I used to think that everyone was. I didn't think I was odd. I thought, oh, we can all see in this
Yes.
way. And then you realize that it is a singular process. And
Yes.
yeah,
Well,
it's an interesting thing for artists.
you said something that is key to me that I did not say, and I still am dissecting it, to be
Hmm.
honest.
Hmm.
You said feeling,
Yeah.
and that is the biggest key to me because as I grew up, I played around 10 different instruments, and today I still play violin and viola a bit and piano, of course. But uh, I've been trying to uh, really break down how I learned instruments because they were easy for me. And what I discovered was it's because of synesthesia. I would hear music that would give me an emotion,
Mm-hmm.
a deep emotion. And you know, you can really feel it inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that emotion, I had the desire to create that emotion. And so I would learn an instrument in order to feel and create that emotion, not
Oh,
learn the instrument. And when you go in from that route, you skip a lot of steps in advancing, so you can learn to play very quickly. For example, I taught myself violin at around 15 and a half, and my
mm-hmm.
only goal was to play two measures of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, the end of the second movement, because I grew up listening to this incredible recording of Zeno Francescatti playing it, and I remember his sound and vibrato that was just rapturous, and I wanted to experience that. So I taught myself violin for those two measures. And when you
Right.
do that, everything else falls into place.
That is so extraordinary. That is
Um,
truly extraordinary. I love that. If only we could all be blessed with that feeling of jubilation, in seeking out the connection with an instrument. And I'm sure many do. I'm sure many do. Even those who sit in the practice room and just diligently play notes. But this is amazing. Wow, Tim, this is really, really interesting. And because I had read that you were quite introverted. And
yes,
when you
introverted and shy and blunt at the same time.
yeah.
And I think I was a combination of those all my life. My mother, as you can imagine from what she went through, learned to be very stoic and independent, and she kind of learned she couldn't rely on people. So she didn't have a need for friends when we were growing up. She was um, just pretty stoic. My father was a ebullient, so I'm a combination of the two. On the outside, I'm like my father, but on the inside, I'm very much like my mother. And
Okay.
I had to learn how to step it up when I moved to New York, because on my Muscogee Creek side, which is where I grew up, one of our inherent qualities is using very few words. So there's a lot of silence.
Oh,
We're not afraid of
really?
silence. I think the what I call the American vernacular is that you're supposed to fill up every silence so that people aren't uncomfortable. We use
Exactly.
silence a lot. Um, and so when I moved to New York, I realized if I spoke the way I did in Oklahoma, nobody would hear me. So I learned to speak the American vernacular I, um, and I kind of do it more naturally now. But at first, I would mimic my husband, Chris, and I would make my voice a roller coaster. It goes up, it goes down. I keep doing this and I end with a smile, you know?
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. Oh, we learn from the greatest examples around us. I mean,
Yes, exactly.
because that is one of my questions today for you to have gone from this profound existence in Eastern Oklahoma, to the Big Apple and stepping into a conductor's shoes, which is very much the team player kind of aspect. Here we've taken this shy kid living in your own fantastic world of just radiance, it sounds like, with
Yes.
as a synesthete. But similar to Jackson Pollock, who's also a synesthete, of course, throwing out the color, you were able to form fit into this new world in the world of music in New York City.
I think I think I did pretty quickly, but I have to tell
Mhm.
you, it's only in the last few years that my own mind has caught up with that. It
Interesting.
wasn't until maybe 7 or 8 years ago that I think I still had the mindset that I had as a teenager in Oklahoma,
Yeah,
that I wasn't really a part of everything. But uh,
that's incredibly candid. I love that. Yeah,
well, it's true. And then you go through all these successes, and you diminish the successes when you have
yeah,
that mindset.
yeah.
Something that you may have dreamed of all of your life becomes just average in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes it takes work for you to sort of see your own place in this profession in music. And now I do feel my place, certainly. But I've been, as I said before, it was such a personal relationship. So I never really had big goals or dreams. I didn't think dreams were in my future. So I just enjoyed each incredible moment with my synesthesia and music, and that brought me to where I am.
That was enough. I adore this. I adore your honesty. But yet, I think at age 16, you actually played with the Oklahoma Symphony, was it?
I did, yes, yes.
You did your debut.
I did. I've had a million miracles in my life and wonderful people. So when I was age 12, my first piano teacher realized that I had abilities and talent, but she didn't know how to take me to the next level.
Hmm.
So, being the good person that she was, she set up an audition with the teacher whose students beat her in all the competitions. And this was a woman in Oklahoma City named Ernestine Scott, who was really the most successful piano teacher in the state. She had incredible players. And I didn't want to go. I was mad. I didn't want to go. But I went, and she said she had no room before we set it up. And then my first teacher said, please hear him, at least hear him. So we went and I played an audition. And after my audition, she immediately said, what night works best for you? And she started moving her schedule around. And because we drove 1.5 hours each way, she would give me the 2 to 3 hour lessons at the end of the day. And she was
Wow.
brutally honest, which I loved because I always hated being treated like a child, and she treated me like an adult at age
Okay.
12 and changed everything for me. So imagine I went from age 12, where I had no structure, really not much technique. And by 14, by 16, she had me playing with the Oklahoma Symphony, and it was the Rhapsody in Blue. I'd won a competition to play with them.
Fabulous.
She has been key to my life.
I love hearing about these kind of moments.
Oh my
It's what
gosh.
ignites a young musician's world.
And without these starter teachers, where would any of us be? You
That's
know?
right. That's right. Oh, I haven't forgotten one of them myself. And it's so important, in our journey that we reflect back on that,
Yes,
especially now, going forward now. I mean, it's key in the world of the arts and in life. It makes us the people we are.
exactly. And I have a photo of her right next to my piano here at Eastman. She's at her piano, and in her will, I got one of her Steinways, so that's sitting in my home here in Rochester.
Oh,
And all of those things just mean so much.
how perfect. And I've just got to say, you talk about your toy piano you had, and it makes me think back about one interview I did several years ago with the incredible British pianist Paul Lewis.
Hmm.
And he grew up poor in a very working class background in northern England, and he had a tiny toy piano which changed his world. And then the library changed his world. His parents didn't introduce him to music as you were so fortunate to have. But that little toy piano was everything to him. And it's extraordinary, just these little moments, Tim. This is what defines us.
It's true, and I played my toy piano so much that my dad had to put some wooden reinforcement on it because of beating it up. And I don't know if you remember, this is early 70s. A lot of the cars had punch keys for the air conditioner and for the radio, and
Yes.
I would
Yes.
sit in between my parents and play on those like a keyboard. So I was constantly trying to play piano, and that's why they asked me finally if I wanted lessons.
Let's tame these active fingers and this
Oh,
imagination. I love it. I absolutely love it. So, when was that moment when you knew you could turn your direction towards music and make it your life force, as in surviving by it, being able to, survive financially?
well, as you know, this is going to be an entire talk about synesthesia, which I love. I've never done
Hey, I'm all for
it.
it.
I love it because it's like my best friend in a way. And I
It
know
is.
people won't understand it necessarily, but it was from a young age, it was like an addiction to me
Hmm.
from before I was double digits. I had a recording of the ballet by Respighi, La Boutique Fantasque, which is based on Rossini themes. And it was just, I can't, it took me to another world. I would come home
Oh,
from school, and I would be running to my room to put on recordings so that it felt like when I heard some of this music, I could finally breathe. So it was so important to me. I've always wondered if it equals to like a dopamine addiction or something, you know?
Interesting. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it changes you on the inside. You have this
Yeah.
excitement. And it was so connected and deep that I never made a choice to go into music. It, it
Mm-hmm.
was going to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
there was no question, not even a moment where I questioned if I was going to do this. I never knew on what level, and I was going to accept whatever level it was. I could still be in Oklahoma, in my hometown, playing music, and that would have been enough for me.
Yeah.
And I'm just so fortunate that things happened the way they did.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you went to New York City in what year? How old were you?
Well, I went to Rochester, where I am now. I was 22. I did my undergraduate degree at Oklahoma City University, which was
Okay.
a great school. My teacher taught there. I was concertmaster of the orchestra. I played in the Oklahoma City Philharmonic. I got to play concertos. We had a great class. If you can imagine, one of my classmates was Kristen Chenoweth because we had a
Huh.
wonderful musical theater and opera program. So it was ideal for me. And honestly, I don't think I would have been ready to go to New York at age 18.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I ended up going to Eastman for my master's degree in piano when I was 22. And then I didn't know what I was going to do, so I started the doctorate in piano. But in between these two degrees, I went to the Aspen Music Festival as a student. I studied with the great Anne Shine, who had studied with Arthur Rubinstein. And oh my God, I just loved her. But a friend of mine told me you could get a full fellowship if you auditioned for opera, and they took you. And I did that. And I got a full fellowship at Aspen, and I played for opera while I was studying piano, and I fell in love. First of all, you can imagine as somebody like me who is sort of shy but blunt, I
Mm-hmm.
loved being around singers because
Mm-hmm.
singers just had big personalities, which kind of drew me out. I
Right.
loved the stories. I loved the music. Loved the communal aspect of creating something. So I came back to Eastman. I got the opera uh, assistantship to play for opera. I ignored all of the doctoral curriculum and I started taking diction classes, opera classes, everything towards vocal music. And I took probably three or four incompletes in the doctoral seminars. I have some great paper titles that never got written. So, because I was just focusing on the music, you know?
You were
And
focusing on what turns you on and what you
yes,
knew you had to do, right?
exactly. And I probably wasn't so good with authority anyway. But so I stayed for 2 years. I learned what I wanted to learn, and then I just left town. I didn't withdraw. I didn't tell them. I just left. And I got an associate coach position at Juilliard. So I moved to New York. I
Okay.
began working at Juilliard and freelancing, and I wasn't even a conductor yet. I was playing piano and coaching, and I could sight read really well. And after years of practicing intense technique, it was very easy for me. So I had a great time in New York in the 90s. I was pretty wild. I was pretty lost as a person. But as with every era of my life, the thing that kept focus was music.
Yeah.
And music, no matter what was going on for me personally, how confused I may have been, music kept pulling me through this line where I kept advancing with jobs, with university jobs, and finally to conducting.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's what it does, that musical world.
Yes.
So you just answered the call of your instincts all the
Yes.
time?
Yes. Because you know, my father, it's interesting. When I was about five, um, and I have this book. This is why I know this. It's There was a tiny high school called Byng High School, Byng, which is outside of Ada, Oklahoma, and they decided to do a little book that told stories of local Creek and Seminole people.
Oh, okay.
And they interviewed my parents, and my parents talk about my sister and me. And in it, I'm five, and he talks about he didn't want us to be the stereotypical Indian kids of being seen but not heard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we were shy. When we'd go trick or treating, we'd have our giant plastic pumpkins. And if there wasn't a white kid with us, we could not even utter trick or treat. We would just hold out our pumpkins with our little brown hands coming out of our costumes in silence. So my father made a concerted effort to help us to assimilate. We started alternating with a white church between the Creek and the white church.
Very
He
good.
started taking us to many things. And in this book, he said he wanted us to be outspoken, articulate, and passionate. Um, and and so, in a way, they never reined me in. I never had rules. I never had chores. I never had to study. I never had to practice. I never had a curfew. They taught me to only do what I wanted to do and what I felt like doing. And I
Right.
think, in retrospect, that was kind of an armor that he was giving me, knowing that a little Indian kid going out into the white world at that time
Hmm.
needed a lot of strength, and my strength was only doing what I wanted. So that happened. That still happens, frankly. I'm very conscious of that, and that's why I think my life is so happy that
Yeah.
I'm not easily influenced by others. Um, I realize as a conductor, and this is such a gift. Years ago, I realized, and you can respond to this, Pamela. As a conductor, no matter how you do, the same number of people are going to hate you and love you
That's right.
because conductors aren't always well liked. And when I realized that, I was released.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
you are.
realized, well, if it doesn't matter, then I'm just going to do what I want to do.
Absolutely.
And
Instead
and
of trying to please. Yeah.
yes, and
And
it's
get
such
the
a
okay.
happy existence, I have to say.
I love that kind of freedom. I mean, really, that is the artistic journey when you get to that
Absolutely.
point, right?
We are so lucky because in so many businesses, they don't require you to get to know yourself. But in music, if you're going to be getting
Right.
up on stage year after year, decade after decade, you have to know why you might feel insecure. You might
Hmm.
have to
Hmm.
know why you're doubting yourself. You even have to know why you're proud of yourself when you get
Yeah.
up on stage. So it's like enforced therapy, which we all need.
It's so true. I remember my first voice teacher at the University of Oregon saying, "You must know yourself." And it took me years to come to peace with that. Years. And it's something I impart to all my singers now. And but I explain what knowing yourself really means on so many different levels.
Yes. And it
It's like,
requires real honesty, you
yeah,
know?
and how are you going to respond when the conductor hates you? How are you going to handle that? No different than your father knew you had the presence of mind and the strength to make good decisions, even based on your gut reactions of what you wanted to do.
Yes, and it was so valuable. I mean, I had the ideal parents for me, and I'm so thankful. He would even tell me as I got
Wow.
older, because he would occasionally just give me pieces of advice. He would say, if you don't, if in class or something, if you don't understand something, ask the teacher to explain it again. Let them think you're stupid. And
Hmm.
that's mainly like, again, not caring what people think as long
Right.
as I learn what I need to learn.
Right.
So he
Exactly.
was constantly giving me strength like that, and he was very much devoted to truth in life.
Mm.
I mean, he was really valiant that way, and I to this day, my life is about truth and logic. So I don't mind arguments because I don't mind losing because all I want to get is to truth and logic. I don't want to win or lose, you know? So
Right.
and if you speak in truth at all times, there's never anything to worry about,
That's
ever,
right.
in any
That's right.
conversation.
We don't need to look over our shoulder and we can sleep at night.
Right. And we don't have to remember the story that we concocted either.
As so many in this business do.
Yes. Well, everywhere, everywhere, not
Yeah,
that.
let's be honest.
Yes.
You've had a great life, Tim. You've had a great life and much more to come. And I'm sure you are imparting all of this kind of truth to your students at Eastman. I mean, I'm sure that everybody who has come into contact with you can describe you in such a way.
Well, it's a combination. I do try to. I share this a lot, and I know because as a young musician, I didn't always have this mindset. I used to
Hmm.
be. I've had years where I was extremely nervous and doubting. I've had years where I was extremely controlling of what I was doing on the
Okay.
piano,
Okay.
um,
Okay.
and they all worked on some level. But I know it's not the right way, and I know it's very difficult to not go through that as a young musician. So
Hmm.
I share my stories in order to plant a seed.
Yeah.
I know it's not going to be immediate, but if I can plant that seed now, at least it will be there within them. And so I think my student, I love my students. And the ones who work with me get it. The ones who haven't worked with me much are really afraid of me. And part of that is cultural. Part of it is everything I've told you about, because growing up quiet as a Muscogee Creek child, again, where we don't use many words, but then I was really, really blunt. Along
Right.
with listen to my New York accent, along with this uh, habit of making eye contact with
Mm-hmm.
silence.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something I ever think about, but it's something that people remark about in my conversations. And I think, again, if you're used to the American vernacular, eye contact with silence can feel a little threatening. But I tell them I'm usually just thinking about Cheetos or the next TV show I'm going to watch. But it gives it
Again,
an intensity that I don't even think about.
I love it. You're like the gentle giant. Now that is the honesty you're talking about.
Well, I'm very honest, and I'm very honest with my students, and I'm very honest with myself as well. So,
That's the way.
yes,
Golly, they are lucky to have you, Tim Long.
thank you.
Very, very lucky. Well, look, I want to share with you something about me. I grew up in a very small town in eastern Oregon, near Pendleton, Oregon.
Mhm,
I grew up going to the Pendleton Roundup Rodeo. I grew up always having Native Americans alongside me.
mhm,
I grew up with the colors. I grew up with the pageantry. I grew up with their sense of music. I grew up with, ironically, their sense of silence in many of my friends. And now you talking about it brings me to a better understanding looking back. It's interesting. And I've always been fascinated by the journey of the tribes that were around me, the Umatilla Indians, the Walla Walla, the Cayuse, which have now become the Confederated Indian tribes.
mhm.
They were very proud people. And I've had a lot to do with them in the past. And one thing I love about the legacy of my life is that I grew up with that, that I have an understanding of Native Americans and their music and their legacy. In fact, I'm very proud of my collection of, and not to sound trite, but my Pendleton blankets everywhere in my home here in Greenwich,
Sure.
Connecticut. In fact, so much so that I wanted to be in touch with that feeling again, that oneness with the Pacific Northwest. And during COVID, my husband and I decided to buy a home, the second home in Eastern Oregon. And I'm back on the banks of the Columbia River. And
Nice.
with that, but with that comes the Temascalet Center, of Indian lore in Pendleton, and of course the Indians who are fishing for salmon, on the river, on the Columbia River. And I love this. It's just part of my background. So for me to be able to meet and speak with you today is so important on another level. Because in my research for this today, I was reading about just the various music and songs that have been shared with the first European and American discoverers. And where we live in Eastern Oregon is right on the Lewis and Clark Trail. And I know even in their writings, they talked about the Indian tribes coming to share their music, which I didn't know at that time. There was no word, actually. They didn't refer to it as music. And in on the Columbia River Indian tribes, they referred to it as songs and storytelling. And I think that's fascinating.
We do have a word for music, haichka. And
Haichka.
yeah, that is literally music. And strangely, I'm these, of course, these words came later. Um,
Okay.
Next to my Hamburg Steinway here at Eastman, and a piano is called Heichkatlokko. Tlokko means a big, so it really means big music
Yeah.
is the word for
Oh, I
piano.
love that.
So we did have that, but you know, all the tribes in as you know, in America have had such different histories. A
Yes.
lot of Americans who don't know a Native person thinks of us as a monolith. We are one thing, maybe one language. We are 574 tribes in the United States alone,
Wow.
which were more abundant before. But my tribes are originally from Alabama, Georgia, northern Florida, and we were on the Trail of Tears. So we encountered colonizers as late as the late 1400s, or no, the late 1500s. The late 1400s was when that papal bull came out, the doctrine of discovery from the Catholic Church, that gave permission for white Christian men to dominate non-Christian brown men throughout the world.
Mm.
Um, just a little ditty there, Pamela.
Just a little ditty.
Just a little ditty. So we ended up in Oklahoma in the 1830s, which was when the Trail of Tears happened. And you can imagine how things were for us because Andrew Jackson also tried to decimate us from this planet. That was the goal, to get rid of us. And he's on the $20 bill now, and
Yeah,
always celebrated.
great.
Yeah. So music was a little bit different in that respect. I think at that point the missionaries came in and converted a lot of natives to Christianity. Luckily for us, it was more mild. It wasn't so harmful like some of the Catholic missions did, but
Hmm.
it was an Indian Methodist conference, and that was very, very mild and very friendly. And so I've had a very kind of lucky time in my lineage that there wasn't too much, relatively too much trauma done to
Right,
them. You know?
right. Thank God.
Yes, yes,
Thank
yes.
God. But it does exist. And this is what has been chronicled in this great work, the operatic work, Missing.
Oh my gosh, yes, that changed me entirely. That was written in 2016. It was started by Pacific Opera Victoria, which is on Vancouver Island, a wonderful company, friendly company, and they did this in conjunction with City Opera Vancouver. And it is an opera, as you said, about the 5,000 missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. And this opera was written by a brilliant, I think she's a genius. She's Dene Métis, Marie Clements, a filmmaker, an author, a playwright, a producer, a director. She's tremendous. She lives on Galiano Island, and just the way she speaks with the for the native voices is so moving.
Mm.
And so she wrote the libretto, and then a Caucasian composer from Toronto, Brian Current, wrote the music. And they worked closely together. He worked so closely with Gitsan people, getting to know the language and the meter, because I would say about 10 to 15% of it is in the Gitsan language.
Okay.
But I conducted the world premiere. I conducted the premiere in Victoria as well. I did a tour, a short Canadian tour, and I did the American premiere. Everywhere we did this, we would do private performances for victims' families. And, up until this point, my life as a Native person was very separate from my professional life, completely separate.
Okay.
Um, and once we started having performances for victims' families who had never been to opera, you would hear sobbing in the first minute that would not stop until the opera was well over. And then we would have conversations with them. And these people who looked like me, who acted like me, who looked like and acted like my family,
Hmm.
um, were so disenfranchised. No one had ever spoken up for them. The Canadian government had done very little to help them. And at that moment, I realized how extremely fortunate I was. Because as I said to you, I still had the mindset of being a boy in Oklahoma
Yeah.
and thinking that no one would ever remember me. But then when I saw that juxtaposed with what they were going through, I realized that with whatever position I had, I needed to stand for them in this world. And I've done that, and that changed me quite a bit.
Oh my. Oh my. What a privilege for you,
Yes, a
actually.
great privilege.
And of course, how do you feel now that so much information is being covered about this time in literature, in film, in shows and TV like Dark Winds? I mean, we're actually gaining a whole new entry into your world.
It's been slow. I mean, think about
Oh,
it.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
been
it
since
has.
the 17 and 1800s that we've been leading to this. And I'm incredibly proud. If you've watched Reservation Dogs,
Hmm.
Sterling Harjo, the creator, is from my hometown. He's the
Okay.
same tribe that I am, same hometown. Joy Harjo's in my tribe. And watching Reservation Dogs, there was one episode where, because it's set in Oklahoma, it represents my tribe, and they told a joke in the Muscogee Creek language, and they didn't explain it or translate it for about 10 minutes. And I couldn't believe it. A national television show telling a joke in Muscogee Creek for Muscogee Creek people. I I wept because my dad would have been so crazy proud of him. My dad knew him and gave him some film and footage for one of his films, and oh my God,
Wow.
that what a proud moment that was. So I love seeing it all. It's still slow going. You know, a lot of people are taking
Hmm.
notice now, but uh, I try to be philosophical about all of this, not angry in any way, because things have happened. You can't go back and change history.
Right.
But the reason it's taken so long is that it's a sort of an ethical uh, issue. If you were to truly look at us, you would have to look at your own history and what
Mm-hmm.
your ancestors stood for, what your government stood for, what your
Right.
church stood for.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a really big issue for to ask a human being to reconsider what they
Yeah,
are and what they stand for. That's why in 2020 we still had a sports team in our nation's capital called the Redskins.
that's
And I
right.
always ask people, would you be comfortable with the Buffalo Blackskins in 2020, the Chattanooga Chinese? And these are underrepresented groups, mind you, brown groups. You know, that's the difference,
Right.
brown. Um, and no, people would be horrified, but people in this country were so desensitized
Yeah.
that the Redskins was okay, and it still is to a lot of people. So we keep moving
Mhm.
that line forward as slowly or as quickly as we can. But I always say when the door is open, that's when you push.
That's very good. Well, you're at that point, aren't you?
Well, I'm at a place where people listen. You know, I never ever dreamed I would have anything that I have in my life. If you had told me about everything that I'm doing in 2025 as a teenager or even in my 20s, I wouldn't have believed you at all. But I do realize as I do my work on seeing who I am and where I
Hmm.
fit, I do realize I have a voice.
Yep.
And my goal is for people to always to think about Native Americans when they're around me. I don't want them to see me as an exception to the rule, which I know many did for years, but as a
Mm,
representative of the millions of people who don't have voices in this country and in this continent.
correct. Correct. I understand. And one of those voices you have right now is this great Native American songbook, which is very exciting. Can you tell us about the genesis of that, Timothy?
Absolutely. It's actually called the North American Indigenous Songbook because we
Okay.
wanted to include Canada and Mexico eventually because
Okay.
we all have different terms. We say Native American or American Indian still in the United States. In Canada, it's First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. They don't use Indian. It's more offensive to use Indian up there. Mexico, they have completely different terms, and that's thus the name of the songbook, the North American Indigenous Songbook. And I've said I married a wonderful white man, and we got together in 2003. So white that he's from Connecticut, and he's fantastic. He's brilliant. You know, he got his undergrad at Yale, his master's at Harvard, and then his doctorate at Juilliard. Speaks multiple languages and has
And
just
he's a singer.
he's a singer, yes, and a polyglot and a very direct, honest person. And he's been wonderful to me. And he has some wonderful families too. And his father is a wonderful guy who's become a really close friend of mine, Randy Plimpton. And Randy and I spend a lot of time together because our sweet doggy Pumpkin passed away last April. But up until then, Randy was her daily nanny for about
Oh,
two
okay.
years here in
Okay.
Rochester. And Randy and I would just sit around and talk. And one night we were talking, we were literally just having scotch late night and talking about all these kind of ideas, just, you know, randomly talking, not even seriously, not even focused. And after 2020, you know, when Black Lives Matter
Mm-hmm.
happened, the
Mm-hmm.
lights came on and everybody panicked out of guilt
Yep.
and which, you know, guilt is good sometimes is not good, but in that case people began reaching out to me because they didn't know any other natives in classical music and asking, are there songs that we can sing? And there really weren't. So I said to Randy, you know, it'd be great if we could commission something because he was always supportive and he always said, if there's anything you want to do, I can see if I can help. And
Hmm.
so we had this idea of commissioning a songbook that that could be done without fear of appropriation, because that's a big deal when you write something by natives. There's this thing in America where we're either ignored or we're revered, and that's a sort of romantic
Hmm.
uh, thing that it alleviates guilt. It does all these things, but it also puts us, people think, you know, my parents must be a shaman or something, you know? And I would say we're very wise, but, when you do that, it prevents you from seeing the human being.
That's right. Hmm.
And so there's a lot of fear of appropriation with Native Americans. And
Okay.
so that was the goal. And that is in our contracts with the composers, that these compositions must be doable by anyone, even when they're in a native language. So
Hmm.
we have language guides when they are in a native language. And we've had some really great composers sign on.
Wow, fantastic. And so this idea just came upon you, and you pushed the door.
Well, it all connects to how I grew up again. I didn't grow up with structure. I grew up with a deep, deep love of music and a
Oh,
deep love of emotion that's connected to music. So that always guides me. But so when I come up with ideas, it's never through a structural process. It's usually I'm sitting around thinking about what I love, and then these things come to me.
hmm.
So yeah, I came up with it that night, and we developed it. Then we decided, because my father-in-law is wonderful, and he started a scholarship in Oklahoma in my name. It's called the Timothy Long Prize, and it
Oh,
goes to Cherokee voice students of my friend Barbara McAllister, a retired Cherokee opera singer. The
yes.
Cherokee Nation pays her to teach their citizens for free, and she's had some talented people. One of our recipients is in her second year at Juilliard right now in the voice program.
How
In
exciting.
Cherokee, a singer named Caitlin Morton, very talented. So we decided then to start a foundation, the Plimpton Foundation,
Love it.
um, named after him, because he started it, and it provides scholarships now to Native American singers, and we also do commissions. We'll do grants for certain projects, but our project is the North American Indigenous Songbook. We had a hugely successful debut last November at National Sawdust. They said the biggest audience they've seen in years. It got a lot of attention. Oh my God, it was such a great night, and we're working on our second commissions now. But it's been so successful that people have been reaching out to us to turn it into a concert. So we're in discussions with a couple of management groups right now about turning it into a concert and seeing how we can take this out into the country and Europe.
Very exciting, Tim.
It is.
Wow. Look what you can do when a village comes together to build something.
Exactly. Yes, and you learn from everything that you do. Every project that I start, the first time I conducted, I was scared. The first time I played the concerto, I was scared. The first time I started speaking out, I was scared. The first time I said to people, I have an idea, will you support it? I was scared. But
Hmm.
everything that you do strengthens you. And
That's
I
right.
think when people see that strength, they want to join in, especially
That's
if they're
right.
speaking from a place of truth and honesty.
I think you're just saying it exactly as it is in life. In fact, I think you should just go take over as a motivational speaker now and just get it out there.
How much does it pay?
A lot.
Really? Okay. I'll
And
consider.
we need truth and honesty right now and
I
leading with the heart
agree. People
and
don't speak out, and you're right. And with the current climate, it's about when is that pivotal point that people are ready to hear your truth and honesty.
exactly. No, that's why we have to keep saying it.
Yes,
It,
and we
it
can't.
can't
I
falter.
I keep saying that we cannot get down. We cannot let any of what's happening crush us, dent us, none of that. You stand strong until that point comes in time that, like I said, when that door opens a little bit, that's
Hmm.
when you push. And it's going to be the same thing with what we're going through today.
I agree. I totally agree. We're going to have to be strong. I think we
Yes.
need you as our leader too.
Oh, you're
There,
sweet.
there is no question. So you are conducting actively. You've got a couple of projects coming up, which are very exciting. One, which is you'll be assistant conducting John Adams on the
Yes.
Antony and Cleopatra at the
Yes.
Metropolitan Opera.
Yes.
Looking forward to
I'm
that.
so excited about that. I've been at the Met since 2023, and
Hmm.
they've been so nice to me. I don't think a company has ever been nicer to me than the Metropolitan Opera.
That's fantastic.
Yes, and it's such a famous company that you would
Hmm.
never guess that somebody would say that, but every department's been wonderful there. And I got to work with Yannick Nézet-Séguin, who I just
Hmm.
adore. And
Energy Plus. Yep.
what a wonderful musician, and he exudes joy everywhere he goes. But this project is I'm the cover conductor for Antony and Cleopatra. It's a Met debut.
Hmm.
Um, and John Adams is conducting it. And I tell you, I've worked with so many famous and living composers, and I've never even met John Adams.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I love his music. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah,
I'm
me too.
Oh my gosh, I'm crazy about his music. So I'm excited about this. He'll be there only for the first 2 days, and then I take over for the next week and a half, and then he
Hmm.
leaves another week later in the process. So I'm going to be doing quite a bit of conducting for this. And the
Thrilling.
director's an old friend of mine, Elkanah Pulitzer. Elkanah and I were on an early gig together in I think the year 2000, and then Julia Bullock starring in it, who went
That's
to
right.
Eastman, and I know her from here. And then I know a lot of other people in the cast and the covers, so I think it's going to be a wonderful room. And we start April 3rd, and I can't wait.
Very exciting. And then after that, in July, I believe you are doing Missing once again.
We're doing Missing in Toronto, and it's a part of our CD release. We did a studio recording, and it's being released on the label Bright Shiny Things early
Love
this summer.
it.
And look for it. I mean, we had a tremendous group in Toronto, an instrumental group called Continuum, and then we had our singers who had been in the production before. So it's going to be a knockout recording.
Wow.
So we're looking forward to that release, and then the Toronto performance goes along with that, and it's going to be very exciting.
And that's a recording that needs to happen. The
Yes, look
legacy
for it on
again.
Bright Shiny Things. Yeah.
Bright, shiny things. I adore it. I adore it. I just got to ask, how did you meet your husband? This is Christopher Dylan Herbert, who's also Martha Stewart's nephew.
He is, and so like I say, he has very interesting families, and I could write a book on his families to tell
I
you
can
the truth,
imagine.
and because they're also different from one another. Well, Chris and I met in 2000 at the Aspen Music Festival, and he was in a Sondheim review, and I was music director for that review, and um, I was we're 13 years apart. I was a jaded 35, and he was a very hopeful 22. And I just thought it was ridiculous. He was brilliant and handsome and nice, so, but I didn't feel that way about myself.
Mm,
So I didn't even pursue it. I thought, well, this is ridiculous. At that point, I had determined that I would be single for the rest of my life. And I have to say that was also connected to sort of a shame that I had in me from being gay and growing up in Oklahoma in the 70s and 80s.
mm,
And
mm.
I
Very
know this
difficult.
wasn't true, but it feels like the day I hit puberty, AIDS came out in the news. And if
Mm,
you remember in those days, Reagan didn't mention it for years.
yeah.
And there, you can look on YouTube. There are government officials joking about it, and that affects how you look at yourself. So I really thought, I'm not gonna. Um, uh, Nobody wants to deal with this. Is kind of how I felt, and I was going to be
Mm,
single forever. So I met Chris, and he was brilliant, and the way we got to know each other because we didn't have a common vocabulary, we discovered that he used to play viola and I used to play violin. So on the off days, we would go to my friend John Bolter, who handled all the string instruments at Aspen. We would borrow instruments and we would play duets.
I love
Still so
it.
geeky, and it was, but I'm a big geek, so we'd play duets. And as you know, Pamela, you feel energy from that.
Yes.
And we got to know each other through that, And uh, and then at the end of that summer, he was about to start his master's at Harvard in Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations, and I was still living in New York.
Wow.
And we, from that point on, have spoken every day. And we got married in 2010. We had the legal marriage on Martha's Vineyard at the Herbert family reunion, where everybody helped. We were barefoot; the whole family helped out,
Oh, I
and it was
love it.
wonderful. And then Martha Stewart said, "I want to throw a wedding for you at my farm." So she had Martha Stewart Weddings come up with a design team, and they threw the wedding for us. And we thought, well, this is not legal at all. We know, but Martha has millions of fans of every political ilk. And we thought if this can again move that line a little bit, then we need to do it.
That's fantastic. Oh my God. Who can boast of that?
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting. And I've said, I did not grow up with Martha. I only know her as an adult, and I always have a
Hmm.
great time talking to her. She's another one who will talk about anything.
That's
And so it's
fantastic.
always fun. She doesn't hold back, and I love that.
Oh, I can imagine you do. Well, this has been an incredible hour so far, and some. And I think you and I could go on for like another hour
I think
easily.
so, yes.
We are kin. We're synesthetes and we are kin.
I'm so glad you get it. I can tell you, I can tell.
Oh my gosh. And when you start talking about that real understanding of synesthesia, how it is in you so deep, the vibrational quality of it.
Yes. It's living at all times.
Do you know, I didn't understand when I was a child when I would look at days of the week and understand I would see colors for them, but I would also feel a certain likeness or a dislike or a certain vibrational, yes or no. Let's put it that way. Um, yeah. I thought it was just something I made up in my mind, I'm telling
But
you, but
that's it. It is feeling. That's the thing. It is feeling. It is emotion. And again, I wondered because I think I was addicted to that emotion. And then I'm wondering, is that dopamine? Have I had a lifelong dopamine addiction through synesthesia?
but hey, it got you through this career. I mean, this is great.
It worked.
And an understanding of yourself. My gosh. Well, look, for a better understanding of you, I have two big questions for you, and these are my signature questions.
Okay.
The first is, if you had an opportunity to have dinner with anyone who has passed from this earth, anyone, who would it be?
It
Just one
would,
evening.
it would be
Hmm.
a lady we called Aunt Sis. And she was my father's sister. So, like him, she grew up with the Muscogee Creek language, learned English second. They're from a town called Yeager, which is outside of where I grew up in Oklahoma. And she died at age 50. They misdiagnosed her cancer. She died in 1982, and she was the most elegant, beautiful lady. We just looked up to her. I remember watching her put on her lipstick, and she was tall and slender, and she smoked, which I thought looked so cool. She would go to Santa Fe to hear opera. She would go to the Met on tour to hear opera. And she heard me, like I got to my piano teacher, my second one at age 12. So she had heard me after I was really advancing
Hmm.
in my abilities, and she was extremely proud.
Mm,
And she died before I really started accomplishing things. And one of the
right.
last things she said, I was told, was that she regretted that she would never be able to see me play in a large concert hall. It was only 2 months after she died that I won a statewide competition that really changed things for me and pushed me on a faster track. And
Yeah.
I would just absolutely love to share my life with her because she is a part of it to this day. I still have at Eastman on my desk a little volcano rock that she gave me for a
Oh
gift when I
my
was about
gosh.
12 or so.
Oh
I have
my
a
gosh.
photo up in my house, and you would think that somebody dies in 1982 when you're 14 that they would just disappear, but she's
No.
still a daily part of my thoughts and life.
What an influence on your life. What a huge evening you would have together
Oh,
talking about everything you've accomplished.
it would be amazing.
Oh my gosh, that's so wonderful. I love that, Tim. And also, if is there one word or phrase? I'm just throwing this at you. I'm sorry, with no kind of warning. Is there one word or phrase that really describes who you are to your heart, to the depth of your soul? What comes to your mind first?
Conduit.
I love it.
I'm a conduit for centuries of understanding and emotion because I'm devoted to scores. I don't really look at music as, um,
Oh,
and this is hard to describe and it's hard to teach as well because I don't know that the words really do this well. I'm so devoted to my scores and understanding the micro and the macro of scores so that I can be a conduit for what that composer was wishing. Because every composer has a different language. And so many people treat them as if they're the same language, but we have to dig. And by the
that's right.
time we get to the place where I want to be, it's almost like I am just I'm an open hallway for these composers to
Mm,
connect with. And as I tell my students, I look at scores as incantations of physics. When we take that score, if we deeply understand it, when we perform it, we are changing the vibrations into the room to the
mm-hmm,
same vibrations that all humans have felt in the presence of this composition since its inception. So in a
mm,
way, we're closing the gap of time,
mm-hmm.
we're closing the gap of knowledge, and if we're really, really present, especially as a synesthete, but even not, we are changed. We're absolutely changed. And here's another thing. I've thought about synesthesia a lot, but what is the goal of music? Synesthesia. We're taking a visual document and then making it physical, which turns into something that is just vibrations in the air. So we are experiencing one emotion through a different one.
Oh,
And that's we're you and I are trying to help everybody to feel what we are as synesthetes. But I do think of a conduit. And here's another one because I'm really into quotes. I read a lot. I read a lot about Buddhism and the Stoic
mm-hmm,
philosophy, and I was deeply moved, still am, by the Italian theoretical physicist Carlo Rovelli. I would
mm-hmm.
urge everybody to read Carlo Rovelli, and especially when he talks about time. Um, but one of my favorite quotes, which is so famous, is the Albert Camus quote about the invincible summer. Do you know that?
No, I don't.
Oh gosh. In the midst of winter, I realized that within myself was an invincible summer. And he talks about no matter what is thrown at you in life, that you have this energy, this strength inside of you, an invincible summer that will outlast any winter, anything that comes into your life that is a problem. So the two words invincible summer, I absolutely love.
How powerful. How powerful. Wow. Well, this has been enlightening, Timothy Long. I've got to say. You I'm going to go forth in this day now and think about so many things. Invincible Summer is going to stay right here.
Yes. Yes.
But also just rekindling our oneness with synesthesia, with which I think is a really important thing to talk about, and so many people don't.
Mhm.
And there are groups that get together and they discuss this and they try to understand themselves. I love it particularly that you have found such spirit and oneness with it, and that has guided your steps with that honesty you speak about, and your way forward in music. And now you're passing that on to everyone.
Well, like I said, it's alive in me at all times,
It
and I
is.
celebrate it now instead of trying to hide it. Whenever I have spoken about it in public, I always have audience members who come up to me afterwards and they almost whisper to me, "I also have synesthesia."
Oh my
Because
gosh.
it's because so many people they assume that no one understands, so they
Right.
hold it in until they meet another, you know?
Right. And oftentimes they don't understand, you
Yes,
know,
exactly. But
and they're,
I celebrate it. It's fantastic. It's
it is.
jubilant. It's everything.
It is. Well, today two synthethes got together and we've talked about a great many things, but the best part is introducing Timothy Long. And Tim, I've got to say all the best to you for everything you're about to do, what you're doing, your whole voyage of discovery. And wow, maybe we'll meet someday at
I
some
would
point.
love that. That would be wonderful. We'll
We
go to
must.
Diego.
We must. And so I invite all my listeners to really go into Tim Long's world at Eastman. And I think we can find you at esm.rochester.edu
Yes,
and at timothylongmusic.com. Am I
yes,
right, Tim?
exactly. And you can also go to the Plimpton Foundation website and read about our projects and scholarships.
Very exciting. And then for those who are really interested, Antony and Cleopatra coming up at the Metropolitan Opera with
An
my guest
event.
today, Tim Long. So thank you again and all the best. Oh my gosh, I'm going to walk away from this with so many memories, good memories.
Pleasure, Pamela.
Thank you. Thank you. So, to all my listeners, please look up Tim Long and his wonderful music making. If you want to see more interviews like this, I hope you'll go to centerstagewithPamelaKuhn.com. And to everyone out there who's listening and has lived and felt the vibrations of this fantastic interview, I want you all to stay safe. This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is now down on Center Stage.